Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here today, and today is a special episode. So I'm so glad you're listening, especially today. I am going to share with you about a woman who followed her leadership purpose, and she happens to be featured in my newly released book that uses her words as the title. And the title is My Faith in the Constitution is Old. And I hope that her story, her life, and her work is an inspiration and encouragement to you as you continue your work, your business, your writing, all you're doing. So I hope it encourages you to pursue your leadership purpose. Now, let me remind you of my definition of leadership purpose. Your leadership purpose is the way you express your purpose through your work. So if you're doing work that expresses your purpose, then you are in your leadership purpose. And you are a leader, whether you are in an official leadership role or an unofficial leadership role, or you're leading your home, your family, your business, you are a leader. And like Barbara Jordan, finding and expressing your leadership purpose starts with identifying and then using your natural abilities as a central component of your work. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. Use your natural abilities as a central component of your work. So that way you find or either stay in your leadership purpose. All right, now let me tell you a little bit about Barbara Jordan. I'll read her introduction as I typically do when there's a guest here. Okay. Barbara C. Jordan, and she lived from 1936 to 1996. She was born in the 5th Ward of Houston, Texas. Her father was a Baptist minister, and her mother was a domestic worker. In high school and college, Jordan displayed extraordinary orating and debating skills. She graduated at the top of her class at Texas Southern University and went on to earn a law degree from Boston University. Barbara Jordan began her distinguished public service career in 1966 when she was elected to the Texas State Senate. She became the first African-American elected to that body since 1883. In 1972, she became the first African-American woman from the South to be elected to the United States Congress, where she served as a member of the House of Representatives until 1979. The highlights of Barbara Jordan's career include her landmark speech during Richard Nixon's impeachment hearings in 1974, her successful efforts in 1975 to expand the Voting Rights Act and to include language minorities. She was the first African-American woman to deliver the Democratic National Convention address in 1976. She did that. From 1979 until her death in 1996, Barbara Jordan served as the distinguished professor at the Lyndon B. School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Okay, so that's sort of the formal introduction and bio to Barbara Jordan. Now, as we're thinking about leadership purpose and that central component of natural abilities, let's kind of trace the journey of how her natural ability of public speaking emerged and how she developed it and how it influenced her leadership and the way she made an impact. Now, at the time I mentioned she was born in 1936. So by the time she was in high school, it was now the 1950s. So in 1950, that was the time when schools were across the United States were beginning the process of merging schools with primarily white students and Black students together. And Barbara Jordan attended Phyllis Wheatley High School in Texas. And at that time, although the schools were integrating, her school was still an all-Black educational institution. So at the high school, she was doing fairly well academically, and the teachers noticed that she was doing well, so they encouraged her. So in that way, it was a good experience. But she also noticed something else. She noticed that even within the context of an all-Black student body, there was disparities and discrimination. And in her experience, she talks about how she felt out of place because the teachers and other students favored the students that were lighter skinned and had what she called good hair. And she felt she couldn't really compete with them in certain areas because the teachers seemed to be obviously in favor of students that were lighter, and she was not. But one day, one teacher encouraged her to put herself out there and join a leadership position in one of the organizations. And she felt like she just couldn't quite do that. But she thought about it for a while and she thought, well, I can set my goals on getting an award in that school in that time. This particular award was called Girl of the Year. So the Girl of the Year award was an award that they presented to seniors. And she set a goal in 10th grade to work toward receiving that because she thought that was something that she could get that would not be, that her looks would not keep her from doing that. So she made a plan to develop her public speaking skills because she knew she was a fairly good public speaker because years before growing up, she was doing different speeches in her church growing up. And she saw back then when she was a little girl how the adults responded when she memorized different passages and spoke in front of the church. And so she knew she was a good speaker. So she decided to use that particular natural gift of public speaking to help her reach her goal of Girl of the Year in her senior year. And so as she worked toward the plan, as she spoke in classes and became more known for speaking, the teachers noticed her. So one teacher encouraged her to join the debate team. So she joined the debate team and she loved it. She absolutely loved being on the debate team, and the debate team was doing well. They were winning locally and regionally and in the district, and she really enjoyed the celebration around winning using her gift in public speaking. So now by the time her senior year rolled around, she did it. She received the 1952 Girl of the Year Award. And they had a celebration, a ceremony, and her parents attended, and she had a chance to give the acceptance speech. And in the speech, she said, "This is the happiest moment of my life." And by the end of the speech, the audience members were in tears because of the impact of the speech. But I won't go into all that now because of our limited time, but it was a very moving speech. So this marked the beginning of her public speaking career. It was a turning point. She had intentionally used this natural ability. We want to call it a skill or a gift. I call it natural ability. She used her public speaking natural ability, honed it and developed it to have this success. And it was the beginning of a core component of her career. And in my point of view, a core component of her leadership purpose, because public speaking became an avenue for her to have a sense of purpose, have success, and a way to make a difference. Okay, so now that was 1952. 1952. Now let's fast forward. Fast forward, she went to college, she went to law school, and then she began her public service in 1966. And as I mentioned in the introduction, that's when she was elected to the Texas State Senate. And so now she's moved on, and she is now elected to be the first African-American woman from the South to be elected to the United States Congress. So in 1972, she was elected to the United States Congress. So she's a congresswoman and fairly new. And 2 years later, in 1974, well, actually, it started early in 1973, between 1973 and 1974. The nation was shocked by the steady stream of revelations and information about the misconduct of the then president and his associates, Richard Nixon. So that was going on while she was just in her second year in Congress. And these events around his misconduct, it was the foundation of a political crisis. And that political crisis became known as Watergate. So now during this time of the Watergate crisis, Barbara Jordan is a fairly young, new to Congress, and she's appointed to the House Judiciary Committee. And her role on this committee during this Watergate impeachment investigation, it was her job, as well as the others on the committee, to investigate the information that they had on the president at that time. And they did it in a public forum, in addition to the, behind the scenes getting the research. So it was this committee meeting that for the first time was publicized on primetime television. So there were months of meetings and hearings, but this one was permitted on primetime television on July 24th and 25th, 1974. So that was something big back then, 1974. Most people watched television. It wasn't this era now where we have internet and all these other forms. And so television was kind of a central component of media back then. So Barbara Jordan was scheduled to speak at a time when most people were at home watching TV, which was just around 9 p.m. And so she had this opportunity to have a huge viewing audience. And when she did, she held the nation spellbound in her speech. But let me back up for a minute and say, and this was a time in her political career when she was, again, sort of new to Congress. And this committee was a very important committee and have that grave responsibility, because the idea of even considering having a president be removed from the United States, the office of United States president, had not been done in recent years. Prior to that, there had only been one impeachment of a president, and that was 1868. That was in 1868, and that was Andrew Johnson. So there wasn't a lot of precedent, and this was sort of a new thing at a new time when people are watching TV. So it was a huge responsibility for the committee and for Barbara Jordan. So now it's the day of her speech. I mean, there were several other representatives speaking over the 2-day period, and the time had come for hers. And she said she remembered that most of the other representatives, when they started their speech, they started with the words, "We the people," "we the people," thinking of the preamble to the Constitution. And while she was listening to them, she said, well, I don't think those words really didn't apply to me at the time. So I'll start my speech with that. So when she started her speech, she started off with those words, "We the people." And this is how she started her speech. She said, "We the people. It is a very eloquent beginning. But when the Constitution of the United States was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt for many years that somehow George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people." And she goes on to say, "Today, I am an inquisitor. I believe hyperbole would not be fictional and not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total, and I'm not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, and the destruction of the Constitution." That was the beginning of her speech. And then she went on in the speech to use the Constitution as a language to communicate in a way that was extraordinarily clear, compelling, and convincing. She made a valuable contribution to the work of the Judiciary Committee and provided insight into the Constitution and the process in a way that was level-headed, filled with evidence and reason, and not emotional. And what I observed in my research of her speeches, that she did something very interesting. She used the Constitution as a communication tool, as a way of communicating in the way that she used the Constitution, not only as a language, but in a sort of a rhetorical strategy, a kind of signifying as a substitute communication form. And she did that in a lot of her speeches, but we're only talking about this one right now. So in that moment, she's indirectly and intentionally advocating through who's going to end up being in office. She's advocating for gender equality and racial justice by establishing a strong, like I said before, strong, reasonable, constitutionally based argument for the Judiciary Committee to vote for the impeachment of the president. And so I talk all about this in my book and point out how she does this. She uses a communication strategy that is drawn from an African-American cultural way of communicating that I refer to in the book as signifying. And signifying on scriptures using the Constitution as American scripture and signifying it on that way. So that's how I observe and interpret what she was doing. But let me tell you what the people said at the time. After that, remember, it was televised, and so it was a huge national event. And here's some responses from the people at the time. First, let me say, Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward, who, by the way, covered the whole Watergate crisis from 1972 and 1973. And he was the one who had brought forth many of the revelations about what was going on at that time. And so now he commented at his radio program on PRX. So these are the words of Bob Woodward. This is what he said about Barbara Jordan's speech. It was like if God were a woman, that would be the voice. What struck me is she said that her faith, and when she said faith, it was almost religious, but her faith was in the Constitution. That was said in a way that just knocked it out of the park. You knew that this was totally sincere and that history had almost come full circle. And those are the words of Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. So his comments, they give you a sense of how people were responding at that time. And letters were pouring in, responding to the speech. And I'll just highlight a couple right now, a couple excerpts from a couple letters. One was from a 9-year-old. And the 9-year-old says to Barbara Jordan, I think you should run for president. Here's another one. All of us who love all the mosaic of this precious land that is our own, we bless you for your forceful, scholarly, eloquent, and epic statement of the case. Now you belong to the ages. And okay, I'll mention two more. Here's one excerpt from a letter sent in. You have changed the minds of myself, my wife, our relatives, and all our friends for the good of our country. As before we watched you on TV, we thought only a man should be president, but all of us will vote for you and any woman or Black man or woman for president. Okay, and last one, not a quote, but something that happened. A man in Houston the next day after that speech went out and put up 25 billboards that said, thank you, Barbara Jordan, for explaining the Constitution to us. So I highlight those responses to say she made a huge impact on people and the nation with that speech and so many other things related to her work, but I'm highlighting this just for our time here today. She made a huge impact because she was following her own sense of leadership purpose. And as I mentioned before, I go into more detail in my book, but I just wanted to highlight this for you to encourage you to think about your leadership purpose, maybe in a new way. And for her, all this was propelled by using one of her natural abilities, one of her gifts, skills, I call them natural abilities, which was public speaking, which propelled her in her career. And she used it as a core component to the work she did. Identifying and using your natural abilities is the core tenet of finding and following your leadership purpose. She followed her leadership purpose, and I say more about this, of course, in my book. I want to mention it here again, newly released book titled My Faith in the Constitution is Whole. And so I hope the story of Barbara Jordan's life and work is an inspiration and encouragement to you, dear listener, to pursue your leadership purpose. And you do that by expressing purpose through your work. And like Barbara Jordan, finding and expressing your leadership purpose starts with identifying, developing, and using your natural abilities, and then use it as a central and core component of your work. And if you're saying right now, well, maybe I don't know. Do I know my natural abilities? I think I might, or I'm not sure where to even think about or how to even start identifying them. Well, I thought you might have that response. So I am inviting you to come join me at an upcoming workshop, and we'll walk you through the process so you can get on your way to more meaning and purpose in your work. And if you are interested in that workshop, just go on over to my website, robinlowens.com/workshop, robinlowens.com/workshop. But either way, I hope you are encouraged, inspired, and motivated by the life and work of Barbara Jordan. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.